So I'm going to make a start. Thank you everyone for being here for this month's webinar. This is the IV Yorkshire and Humberside branch monthly webinar for November. This actually though is our last one of the year. So thank you for those of you who have been here all year. Next month we have our AGM, our annual general meeting. We won't be doing a session, but we'll share about that in due course. So welcome to the end of the year and Merry Christmas, etc. This month we're talking about an introduction to fire strategies. I'll be presenting. I'll introduce myself for those of us that don't know each other in just a moment's time. For those of you who have dialed in for this slot, welcome. This is the early careers section. The main webinar starts at 3 o'clock. I always have a quick look at who's in the call and who's signed up. Lots of you I recognise from having followed us over the last few months. Also, there are lots of new folks this month. To help explain that, we have a slightly different session for half an hour. We have a really quick 2-minute break, fill up the kettle, grab a cup of tea, and then we crack on at 3 o'clock with the main. So you've got me for both sessions this month, and let's get into it. So, yes, the disclaimer, I must do this. So, I have to read this out every webinar. I have to do it twice a webinar because of our early careers thing. So stand by. The disclaimer: any views or opinions expressed or implied on any matters by the authors, presenters, or participants during or in connection with the content of this presentation are solely the views of the authors of the respective comments and or opinions and must not be taken to be the views, position or policies of the IFE. The IFE makes no representations, warranties or assurances and accepts no responsibility for the content and or accuracy of this resource. The IFE shall not be liable for any damages, including without limitation, direct, indirect, incidental, special, punitive or consequential damages that result in any way from your use or reliance on any content in this resource. I have to read that out every webinar. I will highlight that the whole session has been written by myself. Apart from the disclaimer, funnily enough, but everything in here is my own material. So for those of us who don't know each other, my name is Joe Hart. I am a fire engineer, so this one very much in my wheelhouse. This is, I think, the 10th webinar I've done this year, possibly, maybe the 9th. I'm not sure, I've lost count, but probably the closest suited to my background. So I've been an engineer in the UK for the last 10 years. Before that, I did my degree in fire engineering at UCLan. I got my master's in fire and explosion. I hold kind of various roles, but day to day, I am a fire engineer. I've got a fancy job title. I'm a CEO of a group, but really we're a group of engineers and we work very closely together. I also am the president of the IFE Yorkshire and Humberside branch, so I lead the branch along with the committee and with my vice president Catherine. We set up the branch at the start of this year. It's been a really successful one, and that's why I'm here doing this presentation today. A couple of other bits I do. I'm head of R&D at Delta Research and Development, and I also lead the Delta Training Academy. I teach fire engineering up to about level 7. We actually have a level 5 program ourselves. We're writing a level 6 and hoping for a 7. So today's presentation is about level 5, which is sort of second year undergrad level, aimed at practitioners, but early entry practitioners. Certainly our early careers is a little lower, perhaps about level 3 or level 4. Very quick note about the committee ourselves. We call ourselves YHUM, which is the Yorkshire and Humberside branch. We are a volunteer. We're all volunteers. None of us are paid, but we have this fantastic committee of 8 of us. We, although we are the Yorkshire and Humberside branch, we are national and international in our focus. Our core values, our aims are to raise awareness, share knowledge, and spotlight our members. A big part of what we've achieved this year is this webinar series. We do these for free. Again, not being paid for this. It's not an advertising thing. It is just free knowledge we give out, and we're so passionate. So do help us with that. One thing people often don't realise is that the branches are separate entities. We're not the IFE. We're a separate charity affiliated to the IFE. So all of our funding, all of our decisions are made by us as a committee. So if we're doing something right, let us know. Let the IFE know as well. But broadly, we make the decisions. So yeah, do let us know if we're doing something useful for you guys. Webinars themselves, second Tuesday of every month. I think we're true to that this month. Is it the second Tuesday? About that, isn't it? We run a monthly webinar. Often these are based off of what our members want to hear about. So these are, can you please write us a bespoke session about a topic? And that's what this month is. Some of you folks wanted to know about fire strategies, so we've got ahead and written it for you. If you have webinar suggestions or requests, get in touch via the website. We are currently in that early careers session. When we set up the branch 12 months ago, from a pub in York, we decided we wanted to focus on everyone across the industry and not leave anyone behind. So we decided for early careers, we were going to commit a lot of resource to helping out where we could. And that takes the form of these warm-ups, as we call them, a pre-webinar. And in this month's pre-webinar, we're going to talk about lots of fire reports, land on fire strategies, and pick up that point for the main session. Our commitment to our members and everyone there, everyone listening, is that our webinars are and always will be free for members and non-members. Some of you guys are not members of the IFE. You're more than welcome. And the recordings, though, if you are an IFE member, you can pick those up on the IFE portal. This month, for the first time, we're on Teams rather than Zoom. I hope that hasn't caused anyone problems. The reason for that was this was such a popular session. We had to expand the occupancy limit. That sounds a bit fire engineering here. What do I mean? Attendance limit. Basically, Zoom had a limitation, Teams doesn't, so we can get more of you guys in. So that's where we're at. Right, so on with the show. We are starting with our early careers intro. We're going to talk about types of fire report. We're then going to land on the building regulations and what is a fire strategy. In the main session, we go through the REBA plan of work, building regs, functional requirements, types of guidance we might use in developing a fire strategy, what we would put into a fire strategy, and how we develop engineered solutions as well. So when we get asked, and I do lead a fire engineering team, and I, as chief exec, do everything across the business. I spend as much time as I can writing strategies, but I also have oversight of all of our projects and inquiries and where our clients come from and who they are and all that. And very often we get emails saying, can you do us a fire report? Or can you do us a risk assessment? Can you do us a something? Can you just do a fire something? We don't know what it is we need, but we need something. In fact, we had one we've had two this morning, funnily enough, that said just that. So what I wanted to do was to help clarify some of what these reports are and land us on strategy. So we've definitely got, after the early careers, the right focus going into what we're going to talk about after. I again had the benefit of going through the attendees list for this month's session and seeing where everybody works and who signed up, and some of you have reached out to me beforehand, which is always very welcome, certainly after the session, but before as well, to say where you've come from. And we have a really good mix in this month of fire engineers, risk assessors, surveyors, fire service, approval authorities. Everybody is more than welcome, but I want to get us all to a bit of a leveler. We all know what we're going to talk about in the main session. So we're going to run through some types of fire report to kick off. Fire risk assessment, door surveys, compartmentation surveys, design reviews, DESIR, and then fire strategies and retros as well to set us up for the main session. One thing I will highlight for those of us in this call here, we get a kind of ramp up in numbers for the main session, so there is some repetition. These slides are all unique to the early careers, but there is, like, I do the disclaimer again, introduce myself, etc., talk about the branch. So forgive repetition, but it is important because of the structure we have. So into some of the technical bits. The first type of fire report we may consider, and the main fire report that many people consider to be prevalent in the fire sector, is a fire risk assessment. Now, a fire risk assessment is a document that assesses hazards within a building and any occupied building to which members of the public are present and parts of residential premises as well. We have to consider the fire risks within that building. Now, that comes under the Regulatory Reform Fire Safety Order. Under the Fire Safety Order, all buildings to which the order applies must have a responsible person, and that responsible person has many duties under all the articles of the Fire Safety Order, and one of those is to carry out a suitable and sufficient fire risk assessment. So Article 9, as it's shown on screen there, says that the responsible person must make a suitable and sufficient assessment of the risks to which people are exposed, and they must mitigate and capture and do an assessment of those. I am the responsible person for our head office here. I'm at Innovation House here in Preston, which is our kind of labs and offices and teaching classrooms and all that kind of stuff. So as the RP, I hold this duty and I have to do the risk assessment. Or if I'm not competent, I'm pleased to say that I am, but if I wasn't competent, I would seek an expert, a fire risk assessor, to come do that work for me. But the obligation still sits with me as a responsible person under the fire safety order to do that assessment. The FRA must consider all the hazards related to the building, fire hazards that is, and detail how fire safety is effectively managed on the premises. Now, on the screen, anyone who comes to my sessions knows who I am and what I do. You know, I never normally read from the slide. I'm going to chat a bit and then I'll refer back. Throughout this presentation, I've been fortunate, because it's so close to my day-to-day work, to just include a bunch of my projects. So these are photos that I've taken recently. I've got some of my projects in here later on. Some of my team, anyone who's in from my team, I don't know which camera I'm on. I've got two cameras in my office. If I'm looking at the wrong one, forgive me. You'll recognize some of your projects. I've raided the projects tracker this morning and plucked out some examples. These two are mine though. I was on site doing a fire risk assessment just a few weeks ago. Kirsty and I were there, in fact, doing it. And these were a couple of photos I took. And I put these in the presentation because I think they highlight two areas of fire risk assessment that are quite important. That when we identify hazards in a building, no, let me say that slightly differently. We can do a fire risk assessment of any building. You could do a fire risk assessment of a shed or a swamp or a car or whatever it is. It doesn't matter what the environment is. You go in and look for hazards. It could be a brand new building, compliant. It could be a heritage site. It could be an external site like a festival or a campsite, something like that. And you will always find hazards. And they are generally scaled. You get low risk and high risk. And I've picked an example of each of those here. So this was a care home, and the right-hand image is a photograph I took. I went up to the ceiling void, as we tend to do on these things, had a bit of a look at what we've got. They've got some cavity barriers, and then they've got these kind of brick partitions forming the roof void, and they had quite rightly gone ahead and put some fire stopping in. Nice, neat bit of fire stopping. But they hadn't done anything below that. They'd kind of stopped, or they'd had a door and ripped it off, or whatever had happened. And I flagged that in my FRA as a high hazard, a high risk. If we get smoke in that space, that barrier is doing nothing because there's a whopping great hole below it. So that was a high risk that I put in the FRA and said you need to do remedial works. There was an outcome from that that was design based. That's important when we come on to fire strategies. But the other one was that there was a battery on an external walkway. It turned out what it was a mobility scooter. It had broken down, the battery had gone. They swapped it out for a new one and they sort of dumped the battery. Even if that battery had exploded and a bit of that grass had singed, it wasn't consequentially the highest risk that I'd found in the building that day. And my only recommendation was get rid of the battery, put it in the bin, move it away so it's not blocking the escape route. And that is the process of fire risk assessment. We go and we look for hazards in a building, we assess the likelihood and the severity of them causing an impact to the occupants, and we put in place recommendations, which might be you need to construct some more fire bat, get some batter mastic and complete that bit of fire stopping, or more likely put a door in because they needed access both sides. Or it might be as simple as just take 2 minutes, go and remove that battery. So fire risk assessment is the first thing that we do, and we can do that in any type of building. The purpose is to ensure fire safety is being managed in a building throughout occupation once it has been constructed, and we may end up with some updates to the building, or we may end up with just some management procedures. Moving on to some of the other types of reports that we come across, a fire door survey. So fire doors are an important part of any fire strategy. They're an important part of safety in any building. We may undertake a fire door survey periodically. We may choose that once a year we're going to go and look at the fire doors in our building, check that they're not damaged, check that they're still in situ, that they've not got damaged hinges, glazing, anything like that. Or we may, in a building where we know there's issues, as the example I have on screen there, we're going to go and do a general survey of all the doors and plan some remedial works after. The example I have on screen there, I've tried to anonymize everything. If there's anything on there that is client specific, I'll get a text, I'm certain. There isn't. Good. That was one of our team on site last Friday. Alicia was out and about, did some survey, did some inspections of some doors, looked at the gaps, 7mm, 9mm, 4mm, 10 and 45 thickness, and did some checks. Is there a letterbox? No. Is there glazing? Is it strips and seals appropriate? We will find that there is a kind of survey of this existing passive fire protection in buildings, and very often they look like that. We as an organisation, we use an app which gives you the output, and if we're doing a more detailed assessment, there's a report that goes alongside with that as well. We can usually tell what a fire door survey is because it's got pictures of doors in it. I mean, I don't need to be a lecturer to tell you that much. We should be seeing in there evidence that somebody's been to site, evidence of how they've drawn their conclusions, and some data as well, and often some form of output. Now, I do a podcast that many of you I know do listen to, and I don't tend to plug on this format, but there was an episode recently where, although it's called Not All Fire, if I'm going to do a plug, I might as well, where we were talking about the difference between a survey and an assessment, and there is a huge difference between those things, because what I've shown on screen there, and this is an important takeaway straight away, is a survey. All we have done in that particular case is we've gone and we have identified deviations, derogations within those doors. We're not engaged in this particular project to do anything about that. We're not there to fix the doors. We're not there to schedule remediation works. We're not there to assess or really do any kind of justification or assessment for what we find. It's simply a survey. And one thing I like to encourage people is to think, if you are doing an assessment is being asked to look at the evidence that you are provided, to make some kind of judgment, and then to give a conclusion on it. So if this report were an assessment, a find or assessment report, we would be taking that evidence and we would be saying no evidence of intumescent seals around the glazing panels. We would then identify the risk. That means that the glazing may fail. We may get smoke spread between what is clearly a stair and a means of escape. That's a high hazard. So what we're going to have to do is replace that, and we give some recommendation. So a fire door survey is an important report that we come across. It is not a fire strategy, but it is an important fire management document that we will come across working in the fire sector. The next one, again, quick check from Joe that he's anonymized everything. Looks good, doesn't it? Marvelous. So a compartmentation survey. I am really sorry to say, and I say this because it's the early careers, but it is a lesson for everyone. It isn't a thing. It doesn't exist. That name is incorrect. It's erroneous. And people say to me very often, again, we get it on the show, on the podcast. I get it when I'm teaching, when I'm speaking to people. Oh, they definitely do, because everyone calls it that. But you know, if everyone calls it something, it doesn't make it right. Compartmentation in a building is a very specific type of passive fire protection. And it's very unlikely that we're engaged just to review that compartmentation. It's far more likely that we're engaged to look at compartmentation and also all the fire resisting construction that's in the building. So if we are just engaged to review compartmentation, all we're looking at is party walls, separation corridors to flats, separation between units, but we're not there to look at storerooms and cupboards and all those, because they're not compartmentation. That's a very strict definition. So what I rightly call them, and what I encourage people to call them, is a passive fire survey. And people have said to me before, if you call it that, no one will appoint you, because everyone calls them a compartmentation survey. It's not the reason to get it wrong, though, so it is always going to be right from me. So a passive fire survey, as I will call it, is similar to a fire door survey, where we're in an existing building and we're taking a look at deviations and penetrations and breaches in existing passive fire construction. Again, on the right-hand side is one of our reports that I've plucked. Apologies to one of my guys who I've taken one of your reports. It looks good though, to be fair. We've been to site. What we can see is that there's a floor slab that needs compartmentation. In this case, this is a compartmentation breach. It looks like they've drilled a hole for the gas main or the gas pipe, resized it at some point, not filled the hole. That's a breach that we've identified. Again, because this is a survey, not an assessment, we're not saying what the risk of that is. We're not saying how you're going to remediate it. We're not saying what we're going to do about it. We're just highlighting the penetration or a breach which may impact fire safety in the building. The one thing to look out for in a compartmentation or a passive fire survey or a door survey is up in the right hand side. You can see what we've done there is we popped a little pin on a passive fire markup, so we can see what the rating of that wall needs to be or the door needs to be. Really important that that piece of work gets done before we go to site. I've seen all too often, and I'm ashamed to say, can confidently say I've been that surveyor in the past where I turn up and I go, what am I here to see? And they go, just look at the doors. And I go, what doors? What's critical? What's important? I need to rely on my strategy to understand what I'm looking for, which is what we've got a snapshot of there. Cool, doing good for time. We've got just a couple more of these and we land on the fire strategies. So a design review. Now I do hear these called slightly different things. This is a bit of an engineer's term. This is what I call them. Generally undertaken by a fire engineer to set a precedent. And what I've got on the right hand side is an example of a project that I nicked again from one of my guys this morning. Thank you very much to Catherine in this instance, I think. What we've done is we worked on a building and we've been sent the plans, and we don't fully support, or at least we think there should be some alterations before we develop a full fire strategy. And we would call that a design review because we are literally reviewing the design as presented to us. And what they generally look like is a series of comments to give recommendations. In this case, it looks like, and I don't know, I've anonymized the building. Hopefully, there's nothing recognizable on there. But we've said that we need an alternative layout on the first floor. It looks to me to be a resi single stair with some steps down the right hand side to get to the lift. So what we've quite rightly said is we need to have some enhanced smoke control systems. Left hand side, we want to put a natural smoke ventilation system in, a refuge in the stair for anyone who's on the left hand side. What a design review really is doing is helping inform the design team early in the process of critical things that we want to see changed or that we would recommend are changed, so that we can move that design along and we can develop a fire strategy comfortably further in the process. One thing that might resonate for fire engineers or those of us who are consultants is, in an ideal world, we're involved at the very start of the project. We're in meeting one and it's still sketched on a napkin and we can input at that stage. that's not the real world. The real world is we're brought in at the last minute because building control have asked for a fire strategy, and someone's gone, "What's a fire strategy?" and just Googled you, and you've got lucky, right? So very often we find ourselves doing a design review, kind of, as I say there, to set the precedent. Like, we work on this scheme and we can support it, but these are the critical items for you to do. And again, this morning I've done one of them, set of markups that we've proposed to a potential new client, saying we can bid on this and we can do it, but first of all we need to do a design review. We need to just put comments on a page and say this needs to move, that needs to move, we recommend this change, you need to introduce certain things before we can support it. It is typically a set of markups with high level commentary and lines of those passive fire and fire doors shown, critical fire strategy elements that we identify. Again, the flat, it looks like we've got some flats here. I don't know this scheme particularly well, I've not really worked on it, but compartmentation between all flats, fire doors to each flat, riser cupboards, vents in corridors, some CFD on the right hand side. They're the big hitters. We're saying to the client, this is what we recommend you change before we go ahead and develop a full strategy. It might also provide options for design development. We as fire engineers, when I've got that hat on, I work very closely with architects. There are quite a few architects on the call, so we liaise very closely with you guys, and we say, okay, what's the architectural intent of this building? In this case, it might be, I don't know, they don't want a cross corridor door because you want to be able to have clear vision from one end of the corridor to the other. I hear that day in, day out, and I totally get that. We'll put a door in if it's required for fire safety. Or we might say it can be held open, it'll close on activation, you keep your architectural aesthetics, etc. If I'm working with architects, I do like to give options. I don't like to just say this is all you can do. If possible, I'll always give 2 or 3 and say these achieve the standards. And again, I'm kind of narrating my day. But I've been on the call to a contractor just this morning, this afternoon before I came on air here, saying there are 2 designs we would support either. Let's present both to building control, see which one they decide on. So design reviews are really important, and we come across them a lot in fire safety. They are an intrinsic part to a fire strategy, but they are themselves not generally considered a strategy. Another one very quickly before we come on to fire strategies and land at the session before we get to the main part. DESIA risk assessment. Anyone who's followed our webinars this year will know that we did, I think until today, it was our highest attended. We've got a couple hundred on today, which is great. DESIA, or maybe external walls, did really, really well, but our DESIA session was fantastic. Really enjoyed it. Brought one of my colleagues who is a senior DESIA assessor. It's another type of report we'll see within a fire pack. It's not a fire strategy yet, but it is another type of report we will see. Again, I'm frantically reading the image, make sure I've anonymized everything. Thankfully, have. DESIA is dangerous substances and explosive atmospheres regulations. That's what DESIA stands for. And we have, again, a statutory duty to assess those risks where we have high risk environments. The image is on screen there, not one of my own reports. I did sign it off, but it was produced by the team. We've been to a food production facility. We've seen that there is a vent quite rightly out of the production facility, and we would expect that to go into a hopper or otherwise disperse into a safe place. What we've identified is that the fines coming off of that piece of process machinery is actually tipping out onto a bit of grassland, and there'd been a complaint to a local council. So in a DESIA risk assessment, very much like a fire risk assessment, we go to site, we identify hazards, we think about how much of or rather what the likelihood and severity is of them causing harm. From that, we do our risk assessment and we recommend changes. To read just below the photographs there, this part of the process has blown fine dust all across the ground at the back of the building and has a complaint from neighbours. Really common in DESIA that we're engaged because of complaint in the local area. Let's remove that box. No further details were given. In this case, the snapshot I've taken doesn't have the outcome, but that's a really important part of a DESIA assessment. In this case, it would be that vent is either continued around to a safe area, or it discharges into a hopper that can be opened, or some other solution like damping it down or whatever it might be. DESIA risk assessment is an important part of fire and explosion safety in buildings, not a fire strategy, but another important thing that we see when we are managing buildings. A key point at the bottom there, and that leads us to fire strategy, and we're pretty much bang on for time actually. Very often off the back of any of these pieces of work, any of these reports, we end up with a result to do some design. Now we may in this, I'll stay on this one because it's quite handy. If we say here that we need a solution to this because the risk of this hazard is too high, we have to then design and decide what we're going to do. Now, I don't know this scheme particularly well, and if my colleagues on the call who wrote this, forgive me, I'm not trying to design on the fly, but there are a couple of options I can see as a designer right in front of me. And I promise I haven't done this before, I'm just looking at it live. You could either put a hopper on that piece of grass on the outside. You'd need a bit of a hard standing so you can empty it and have that ductwork discharge into it and make sure that that's intrinsically safe. You could put a dogleg into that vent, take it off around the corner and discharge it somewhere that's not going to impact the neighbours as long as it's safe. You might choose to take it up rather than down onto the grass and discharge into the atmosphere, again, if it's safe and you can collect it afterwards. Or kick it back into the building and have your hopper on the inside. Definitely my preference if you've got the space, because then you're not discharging to the atmosphere. You remove that potential for a complaint or impacting the neighbours completely. You don't need a hard standing, assuming you've got a concrete floor. So there's 4 options off the top of my head. And the point that I come to here is that very often off the back of any of these pieces of work, we find ourselves having to design a solution. And we land here at fire strategy reports. Now, these couple of slides we repeat in the main session. I wanted to get us to here before we start the main session in about 4 minutes time. So I'll whiz through these, but we do refer back. So if we have anything that comes off of our building risk assessments or management systems, or we're designing a brand new building, and we will require a fire strategy report of some kind. And there are a couple of different types of fire strategy reports we will come across. The first one, and it's the first one that I think of, and I would wager, if I were a betting man, which turns out I am, so I will wager, that our friends in the fire service would likely consider this, and approval authorities, this is what we see as a fire strategy. If I said draw a fire strategy, you'd draw one of these, because it's a design strategy. So it is during the course of the design of a building, working with our architect friends and working with the design team, we are developing solutions along the way to implement to that final building before it becomes constructed, becomes reality, and we design into the scheme. Generally, they're developed slowly throughout the design stage. We are making decisions along the way with the architect about how the building's going to look, what it's going to be made out of, and how it's going to operate. We follow what we call the REBA stages, which we cover in the main session. The intended audience for that changes throughout that design stage, and this is the main session content, but I wanted to at least tease it in this so we've got it in our minds. We're not always writing a fire strategy for the same person or organization or body. Early in the design, I'm writing that for the architect and the design team. This is what I think we should do collectively as a team. Like, thank you for inviting me to be part of your team. This is what I recommend we all do. But later on, I am, as that team, presenting a coordinated and final strategy to the approval authorities. So I'm presenting that to building control, to the fire service, to the building safety regulator, whoever's reviewing it, and that's going for approval. And then later, when it goes and is constructed and becomes an occupied building, the intended audience for my report is the responsible person, the person that becomes responsible for looking after the building and needs to understand it. And there is just one more type, and I wanted to touch on it here again, and then we come back to each of those 3 in more detail. A retrospective fire strategy, or a strategy for an existing building. And the reason I mentioned the fire service before was I have a colleague who's on the call, and we had a really good chat who she'd come from a fire service background and joined us, and we were talking about fire strategies, and we had not come across previously this idea of writing a strategy for an existing building. And the colleague who's on the call, it was one of the most important discussions I've had with anyone for the last few years, because it opened my mind completely. I touch on this a lot in the main session, but at this point, let's consider that not only are we designing, sat with architects designing new buildings, but very often we're writing a strategy for a building that exists. Might be 1,000 years old, like the White Tower, might be 10 years old. A building that already exists, and we have to consider how it would meet current regulations. So I pause on that point, and then we commence the main session. I've done it with like 30 seconds to spare. So I will pause for a moment, and then the main session starts at 3 o'clock. But I hope we've got to a little leveling point and we pick up from there into the main session. I can see questions flying in. I'm going to do some questions at the end. Keep them coming though, and I'll brief on that in just a moment. So quick sip of coffee, and I'll start again in just a few seconds time. Right. Good afternoon, everyone. It's now 3 o'clock. Kirsty, how do we look and sound for the main session? All still looking all right? Did everything go all right in that first half?
Yep, looks and sounds good to me.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Right. Afternoon, everyone. Many of you have already listened to me for half an hour. Some of you haven't. We've had that little ramp up, so forgive some repetition. Welcome to this month's webinar from the IFE Yorkshire and Humberside branch. This is a session about introduction to fire strategies. It's our November session. It's our last session of the year. I'll tell you a tiny bit about the branch and today's session in just a moment. Couple of caveats for this part of the talk. Please do bear in mind that the webinar is being recorded. We ask that you keep your cameras and microphones off. That's mainly to save my bandwidth, to be honest. Any questions, if you add them to the Q&A, they filter through, and I'm going to answer some at the end. Any I don't get to, I'll reach out to you personally if you want to give some details, and I'll answer them all this evening if I can. Please do be respectful of the presenter, organisers and fellow delegates throughout, let me move that box, throughout the talk. And afterwards, if you have feedback, if you want to get in touch, please do let us know. I'll give details at the end. But come to the branch, come to me, come to any of the guys on the committee. We do like to hear from you guys. So I have to do this disclaimer. Some of you heard me do it 20 minutes ago, but let me just do it again. So any views or opinions expressed or implied on any matters by the authors, presenters or participants during or in connection with the content of this presentation are solely the views of the authors of the respective comments and or opinions and must not be taken to be the views, position or policies of the IFE. The IFE makes no representations, warranties or assurances and accepts no responsibility for the content and or accuracy of this resource. The IFE shall not be liable for any damages, including without limitation, direct, indirect, incidental, special, punitive or consequential damages that result in any way from the use of or reliance of any content of this resource. I have to read that. It's the only part of the presentation I haven't written. I'll tell you everything else in here is my own work. So again, we split the session into early careers, which is a bit of a warm up, and then the main session. So I'll introduce myself again. My name is Joe. Whenever I look at the attendees ahead of the sessions, as I often do, loads of us know each other. So it's good to see you all. Any of us that don't, a very brief intro. I am the founder and CEO of Delta. I'm head of fire engineering. I collect job titles, but broadly I'm a fire engineer. Of all the sessions I've delivered this year, and I think this might be my 10th or maybe my 9th, I'm not sure, this is the one most in my wheelhouse. I spend as much of my time writing fire engineering work and as little of my time being a CEO as I can these days. I am also the president of the IFE Yorkshire and Humberside branch, so I lead the branch along with an amazing committee who are all, I think, dialed in now, which is great. My background in fire, started doing a degree in fire engineering. Well, didn't start, I finished it, but I started by doing a degree. I then went out, got a job as a grad, worked my way up, set my own firm, etc. I've been a fire engineer for the last decade here in the UK, mostly based in London, but I am up north. A lot of my work's still down south, but I've worked across the country, kind of across Europe during that time. And I've got a master's in fire and explosion engineering as well, just to help kind of substantiate why I'm talking about this topic. Right, the Yorkshire and Humberside branch, we are a volunteer committee. One thing that I've been speaking to folks about, and they don't fully know because it's not always clear, that we are not the IFE I'm not here representing the IFE, I'm representing the IFE Yorkshire and Humberside branch. We are our own charity with our own trustees, with our own board. We have 8 members of our committee: Bassett, Becky, Ben, all the B's, Joe, Catherine, Kirsty, Limara and Tia. We are all volunteers. We don't get paid for this. We do it because we love what we do and we want to give back. Our aims are to raise awareness, share knowledge and spotlight our members. Check out the website, etc., etc. One of our big successes this year, it's our first year. We started the branch back in October of last year, but we didn't really start properly until January. We have built this webinar program. The fact there's a couple hundred of you on this call is huge for us, I promise you. And we've done a bunch of stuff as well. So yeah, look out for us, see what we're up to. The webinars themselves, if anyone hears me listen to mention early careers, you're not sure what I mean. Before the main session at 3 o'clock, we have a pre-session because we were really passionate that we wanted to make sure no one comes to these sessions and feels lost. So we have what we call our early careers webinar, which is half an hour in advance, running through some of the background. And then when we hit the main session, everyone's on the same everyone's in the same position, knows what we're talking about, and we can hit it as we'd want to do. So yeah, our early career session, we've just finished it. It's 25 minutes, 29 minutes this month, because I went on a bit. And then we get to the main session and welcome the rest of you guys in. Webinars are and will always be free. and recordings are on the IFE page if you're an IFE member. You don't otherwise have to be an IFE member to attend. Lots of you guys aren't, and everyone's really, really welcome. So thank you again for being here. Cool. Right. So aims of this session then. We are talking about an introduction to fire strategies. One thing I've not mentioned in the main session yet is that most of the topics we choose to deliver are from our members. They say, could you please cover this? I think this was one of those. Someone reached out and said, hey, I want to get into fire strategies or understand what they are. Can you run a session? And we've written it. So yeah, if you ever have an idea, let us know. We're always happy to write them bespoke. So the aim of today, introduction to fire strategies. This is an awareness session. It's not a training session. I'm not going to issue a certificate at the end of this and say, there you are, there's a certificate, go write strategies, go for your life. It is an awareness. We have a really diverse range of folks on the call today. As I said, and I said it in the early careers, I had a chance just before we came on air today to spin through the attendees. And we've had almost, I don't know the number, but it's like 90% of people that signed up are here, which is great because some people sign up and forget or whatever. So it's a pretty accurate reflection. And we've got fire engineers, risk assessors, architects, clients, building control, fire service, I might have done you guys already, approvers, everyone on the call. So I'm really excited to be able to speak to you all. The point of this is awareness of what a strategy is and kind of from personal experience, how we go about writing them and how we develop our solutions. So as with anything I do, some of you guys follow me quite closely in what I do. I'm always going to talk practical knowledge. I'm a practitioner, and I'm a practitioner first and a theorist second. I do it, then think about it later very often. But I'm going to give real world case studies, and I'm going to talk about how we do this in the real world. 10 minutes before I came on air here, I was writing a fire strategy. This isn't something I was doing 20 years ago, and I'm still banging the drum on it. I was doing it 10 minutes before the session. I'll be doing it 10 minutes after. That's my promise to you. So what is a fire strategy? We have got lots of different reports we might come across in a building. Fire risk assessment, DESIR report, compartmentation survey, wrong name, but a passive fire survey, door survey, etc. We know about those. But a fire strategy is a very specific type of document. It is generally a document that provides the overall fire safety objectives for a building. Now, I will caveat and say it doesn't have to be a building. I've been fortunate enough to write fire strategies for ships and aircraft and trains and all sorts of like fields, campsites, whatever else. I'm focusing mainly on buildings here based on what the IFE are looking at and who's on the call. The point of the strategy is to define at high level the provisions in place to protect fire safety in our building. Generally speaking, if I said to someone, draw a fire strategy or describe a fire strategy, we would consider a design document. It's something that we develop in line with the design of a building, and we present it at the end of the design stage to the approval authorities and say, hey, here's what we think we're going to do. Does it work? And if we get the stamp and we say yes, we go ahead and build it. The fire strategy is more complex than that, though, and that's what I'm hoping to bring awareness to, is that it's not simply a piece of paper that costs a fair chunk of money. You wave in front of an approver, they stamp it, and you walk away from the job. It is a complex document that develops over time throughout the design stages, and it should reflect the current design principle. I touched on this in the early careers, but not in great detail, and it is the first big takeaway really from the main session, is that, and when I train people, whether it's trainees who are working with us in the firm, whether it's students, whoever it is that's learning from me, and I always feel privileged to teach this, so it's always weird to say that, but anyone who wants to learn from me, first big lesson in strategies, always consider who's going to read your report. So who are you writing it for? It's so important to understand that, because the audience of your fire strategy, or the reader, or the end user, whatever we want to call it, changes depending on at what stage you're writing that strategy. If we are in the early stages of design, we are probably working with a design team, and we are saying to the design team, here's what I recommend we do as a team. And the intended audience for that is the design team and the architect and the client. And we're probably presenting options. Early design stage, we're saying, I'm going to use my building around me here because it's a good case study. That corridor, maybe, I don't know if my camera's on, and I don't know which camera I'm on. Bit of a shambles. There's a wall behind me if you can't see it, I promise you. Does that need to be fire rated, yes or no? There is no right answer to that, yes or no. In some strategies it does, in some strategies it doesn't. I've chosen not to fire rate that wall because above the ceiling in my office here is a shambles, and I don't want to have to fire stop the whole thing. So I've developed for my own building here a different solution that doesn't rely on that wall being fire rated. If that were a design team and it wasn't my own building, I'd be saying to that design team, here's some options. They're my audience. Later in the design, when we come to present that to building control or to the fire service, my audience changes. And I'm not presenting options, I'm presenting a final design. And this is what we decided we're going to do, guys. And here's what we're proposing for them to approve and stamp. And later on, once it's complete, the audience changes again. And no longer is it for the people around me on my design team or for myself. I'm writing it for the people who will use that building. I'm writing it for the end user who will be managing the building. And I have to change the way I write the report depending on who's going to read it. It's one of the questions that I ask in Kickstart meetings we have internally. Who's appointed us? Because if we've been appointed by an architect, we speak very differently in our reports to if we've been appointed by a fire safety manager, to if we've been appointed by a responsible person who doesn't understand what their responsibilities are. One of the very first things that we do in that engagement, and when we're thinking about fire strategies, is we think about what we're trying to achieve. What are our objectives? And there are many, many objectives that we might consider when we are writing strategies and working in fire safety generally. The first of those is life safety. We're seeking to protect the people that are in the buildings, and that's intrinsic, and we can never argue that, and that's one that never goes away. It underpins our regulations, it underpins all the work that we do. All of our professional ethics and standards is based on protecting life in buildings. If anyone contests on that, leave a call immediately and I'll speak to you after. Like, that's irrefutable. But we also have other things that we might also put into our fire strategies. For example, we might want to enhance certain things to protect the property that we're working on. I am fortunate enough to work on loads of heritage properties. In addition to getting everyone out the building and protecting firefighters going in and protecting life, I'm also interested in the property protection, the asset protection. If I work on a museum or a gallery, one of my objectives is also to make sure that everything in that building survives a fire and we knock it down as early as possible. The couple of examples on the right-hand side are great examples, I think. The top right there is a line-side fire on a railway. We do lots of work on railways. We know that fire there, that is, in truth, a small fire. That is probably a very small fuel load that's burning, very, very hot, very clearly, and we've got incomplete combustion, loads of black smoke, etc. But really, that's not a fire that's critical. It's in the open air. But that would shut down that entire rail line for many, many hours, I promise you, because one of our objectives when we're working line side is not only life safety, property protection, because that's really low in this case, the risk, but operational continuity. We want to knock down fires so that we're not going to shut down an entire railway line, because in that case, you can't see the signals, so they'd stop all the trains. If that were a big station, King's Cross, Euston, London Bridge, whatever it might be, I'm pick London stations, but Manchester, Piccadilly, Preston, whatever else. That's huge. That's hours of disruption. We've all stood at a train station annoyed because we can't get home. It's maybe something like that. So our objectives change, and we have to consider those early in the strategy. Bottom right-hand side, again, anyone who follows what I do, I've talked about this a lot. This is the Palisades fire in Los Angeles or California earlier this year in January. I was at the fire. I went over to it, and I'm hoping to go back in January next year, in just a few weeks' time, to go and see the cleanup operation and see what's going on. But aircraft were rerouted, there was environmental damage. I was in Santa Monica, was where I was based, and all of the firefighting water was running off the hills into the sea and was killing the fish. It felt minor at the time, but on reflection, it was huge. So objectives is one of the first things that we obtain once we know who we're writing the strategy for. Super important for us with fire strategy development. Now, in addition to thinking about what we might like to do, there are things that we must do. We have requirements, and our fire strategy requirements for us, I'm going to talk in England because I'm based in England here, but broadly this is across the UK, is we have requirements in the form of regulations. For us here, we consider the building regulations to be our absolute minimum. Strategies are developed in line with the requirements for the building regulations. The building regs 2010 brackets as amended, but in this case we're saying that they were made under the Building Act of 1984 as amended by the Building Safety Act and others. But broadly, these set out requirements we must meet in our fire strategy. If our designs do not meet the requirements set in the legislation, we have committed a criminal offence. In truth, we cannot get away from those. It's our bare minimum. And a second kind of beat and takeaway from this talk is that one thing to consider is that the building regulations are only based around the requirement for life safety. So if you meet the minimum standards of the building regs, you have met your obligation, the objective of life safety, but there is nothing intrinsic in them for property protection, environmental protection, operational business continuity, protecting the assets. So we very often find We work to these and we go above. Certainly me as an engineer, if I'm working with clients and I know what they're interested in, I'm going to go above and beyond wherever I can. So our first requirement is for our building regulations. And the building regs, for anyone working in fire and you haven't read all the building regs, I encourage you to do so. Go read Part A. We're interested in Part B, but read Part M, Part P, Part S, Part T. There's just been a new T, but it is important sometimes. Part T is toilets, by the way. So the building regulations are uniform across all disciplines. They work in the same way, which is what we call a functional system. They set functional requirements. They tell us how, what to achieve, but not how to do it. So when I say go and read all the building regulations, I'm not suggesting take a week off work and read them. I'm saying on the bus home, open them up on your phone and skim through them. It takes you 20 minutes. Essentially what the building regs do is they set a bunch of functional requirements that we must do certain things to protect life safety in buildings. The example on screen there is intentionally not fire, it's structure. What it says in Part A is that the building should be constructed so that the combined dead, imposed and wind loads are sustained and transmitted to the ground safely, etc., etc., etc. It doesn't tell you how to do that. It just says that's what you need to do. And for us in fire, we've got Part B. That's broken down into 5 sections, Part B 1 to 5, and it gives us all the different requirements that we need to do. What they look like is this. They are a set of functional requirements. External fire spread is Part B4. It tells us that the external wall shall adequately resist the spread of fire over the walls and from one building to another, and the roof should do the same. It doesn't tell us in our standards what we or how we should achieve that. It just tells us what we have to do. We get the what, but not the how. The system gives us flexibility as designers, but it also sticks the onus on us. So in our fire strategy development, the first decision after we've set the objectives and who the audience is we must also then decide what our definition is of adequate in terms of external fire spread and what we deem to be appropriate. We are essentially in our fire strategy setting out the definition of those terms and designing our building according to our own definition there. Now, I come on to kind of how we write the strategy and then the methodology, and that's where we go in the next part of the talk. I've talked a little about the REBA stages. I've mentioned them. REBA are the Royal Institute of British Architects. I'm a member of REBA, an affiliate or associate, whatever it is. If anyone's in fire, and your company covers some professional membership, stick this one on, because I find it to be one of my most beneficial professional memberships, actually, because you get the REBA journal and you get to understand architects and their processes, which is unreal. They also have an amazing CPD section on their website. So yeah, good little tip. We look at the REBA plan of work, and the REBA stage is an awful lot in fire. And that's because if we are designing a design fire strategy, we are generally working in a design team and we're working through the stages alongside that team led by the architect. So what the stages do is they start at strategic definition, stage 0. They go all the way up to stage 7, which is in use. And along the way, we get all of our design stages up to stage 4, into construction and manufacturing at stage 5. 6 is handover of the building and 7 is in use. Fire strategy reports, I mentioned, is not a piece of paper we write, give to building control and then invoice the client. It is a process that we follow. I find generally a REBA stage 2 fire strategy report is one of our first engagements. Anyone in the early careers, we talked about a design review. Often a design review is what we achieve or output at REBA stage 2. What we're doing is giving concept design advice. So high level advice, this is what we're aiming to achieve and this is what we recommend putting into the building. And as we progress through the stages, we get more and more detailed. And again, remember our audience changes. So at REBA 2, we're working with a reduced design team. At REBA 3, there's more people joining. We're working with structural engineer colleagues, mechanical engineer, electrical, whoever else might be involved in the team, client, hopefully, if we can be. REBA 3, we're doing a developed design. REBA 4, we're doing technical. That's the last design stage where we seek approval. Then at 5, we go to construction, we build the building. 6, we hand it over, and 7, we're in use. Fire, I say all the time in these, is one of those unique disciplines, or sectors, I suppose, that are involved at every REBA stage. We don't step down, we don't demount at any of those. We are involved throughout the whole building life cycle, and we're quite unique in that. Now, to explain this, I thought I'd put an example in, and it is a made-up example, it's fictional. But to be fair, it could be every project because we do it so regularly. I was thinking the best way to describe this, and I thought what I would do is if I were writing a fire strategy and I was fortunate enough to be engaged at the very early stage, at REBA stage 2, that's the early design, and I'm going to be working on that scheme right the way up to handover at Reba 6. That might be a 2-year job. What does my strategy do during that time? How does it evolve and change? Because it does. It's the same core strategy, but it will change. So I've got a couple of examples here. There's a big white space because I fill in on Reba 3 and we go through this together. But I thought I'd pick a fire alarm, what I might say at each Reba stage for a fire alarm system. So Reba stage 2 is quite high level, concept design stage, and I would be engaged and I would be designing a fire strategy, and I would be making a decision about who's in the building and how I'm going to protect them very early on. I'm not considering materials yet. We haven't got a plan, a detailed design plan. We might have some floor plans that are in abeyance, and we're kind of working through those still. But I'm going to make key strategic decisions at this stage, and I might decide I'm going to put a fire alarm system in. So the text of my report would read something along the lines of, the building should be provided with an automatic fire detection alarm system to provide early warning to occupants of fire. And should is an important word there. It's very intentional that I've put that word there. What I'm saying at this stage is there should be an alarm. That's what I recommend. I'm not saying there will be. I'm saying that I recommend that we should put an automatic alarm in here. Not every building has an automatic fire alarm detection, so that's a decision. That's a design decision. That decision comes under my insurance. I'm giving that with the best knowledge and experience that I have to recommend for my particular building. Now, let's say a couple of months later, we get the design in place and I'm engaged to then write a Reba 3 fire strategy. My report's being updated and we're now at a more detailed design at Reba stage 3. My advice hasn't changed. Thankfully, in this fictional scenario, the architects listened to me, the design team's agreed. Cool, Joe, we're going to stick an alarm in. In my report, I add more detail. Because not only the fire strategy, but the overall design for the entire building has got more detailed, and I'm just matching that. I've got more information available to me. The team's expecting more information and more detail from me at this stage, and I'm able to add in a little more detail. So at Reba 3, I'm going to move on, and I'm going to say, in addition to what I had said, the building should be provided with an automatic fire alarm detection system to provide early warning to occupants of fire. That hasn't changed. But underlined is what I add. So that the alarm system shall be a category L3 in accordance with BS 5839 part 1. This level of detection shall provide coverage throughout all escape routes and rooms opening into escape routes. That is a design decision again. That comes under me. I have to make that decision and be able to back it up if I'm questioned. But I'm deciding now. We've got a little more information. I've probably got a relatively fixed layout at Reba 3, what it's going to look like. So I know I've got escape routes, rooms opening into, so that's the category I'm going to choose. Moving on to Reba 4, which is my final design stage, I give a lot more detail. This is the last report, and again, I'm thinking about the audience. So this isn't just going to my design team and the architects sat around me, it's also going to the approval authorities. It's going to go to building control, building safety regulator maybe, it's going to go to the fire service, it's going to go to everyone on the client to sign off. So I need to give really clear, really definitive decisions at this point. I can't have options in a Reba 4 report, because if I send that to building control or fire service, you are quite right to send it back and say, make a decision, chaps. Which one are you doing? So my terminology changes at Reba 4. Instead of saying the building should be provided with an automatic fire detection, I change it and say shall. It will. We've made a decision. This is what we're going to do. I still have the information about the category of system, but I have more detailed design as well, because off the back of this, we need to go find a contractor, we need to procure, we need to go out and build the thing. So this time at Reba 4, I've added. It's been identified that smoke detectors may cause unwanted alarm activation, and therefore heat detectors shall be provided in kitchens and plant rooms. Fairly straightforward design decision. I've plucked that out of 5839 part 1. I'd do that on every scheme, but it's final decisions that I've made, and I'm documented in my strategy. Detectors should be interfaced with the AOV. Detectors shall be, important word, interface with the AOV at the head of the stair. That's the vent at the head of the stair to open. And the smoke control system in the firefighting shaft. A good stage 4 design there. That's all the information that we need. I would read that as an approver, if I were an approver, and go, yeah, okay, that makes sense. We've got a decision. We know what we're going to do. Strategy's pretty solid. Now, that's the last design stage. When we go into construction, if we are still engaged and working on our strategy, our approach changes. Because at Reba 5, whilst we're on site, we need information about what's been approved, but also how we're going to do it and what's going to be installed. This, I've run out of page. There would be more to this, but the fire alarm, everything else is the same. The fire alarm panel and all control and indicating equipment shall be commissioned prior to use and observe the following standards. Typically, I'd put in a cause and effect matrix, or I'd put something in there to do with the actual product to be installed. Maybe who's installing it. REBA 5, because it's construction, it needs to capture what's going to happen during construction to support that building. There's a slight differentiation here, which I'll go on a tangent with. It's not on the slides, but sometimes we're asked to do a REBA 5 construction strategy for the construction site itself. That's totally different. That's looking at the risk that we're introducing to site, not what we're trying to do for the final condition. So there's a big differentiation there, but we'll stick here with our design that we're designing, our building we're designing right the way through the REBA stages. And then when we get to REBA 6, the next one, which is handover, really important change in terminology. No longer are we proposing to do something. No longer are we telling the approval authorities. No longer are we telling the design team. No longer are we telling the contractor. Totally different audience. So totally different terminology. When we hand over the building, our fire strategies need to be updated. No longer are we saying this is what we might do or should do or will do or anything like that. But this is what we have done. So a REBA 6 handover strategy, the building is provided with an automatic fire detection alarm system. The alarm category is a category 3. This level of coverage provides, not will provide, does provide. Heat detectors are provided, detectors are interfaced. The system has been installed and commissioned in line with documents provided in Appendix A1. Stick the certificates in, stick the witness testing, whatever it is that we might have to help support or indicate the fact that the alarm's been installed correctly. Pop that into Appendix A2, A1, that's the way I tend to do it, but there's no right or wrong. So as we develop the strategy, I hope in this kind of section of the talk, we talked a little bit about it being a moving document and a live document, not simply a piece of paper we build 10 grand for and get a stamp on and walk away. It changes and it evolves, and that's the reason that we hope to be engaged throughout the design, so we can support the design team with that. Now that obviously we're talking here about new builds, and we differentiated at the start that we've got different types, and in the early careers we started on this and we dropped it and said we'd come back. And I told a story in the previous one of my my amazing colleague Tia, who's on the call, I think, and we chatted once about how we might do what we might expect in the fire service of a fire strategy, and we'd expect it to be a design. And approvers sometimes are not aware of this, but actually a huge chunk of work that we do in the fire sector is about existing buildings. And there are lots of reasons that an existing building might not have a fire strategy. It might be that we've just, we being the royal we, the world has lost it. There wasn't a record of it. That happens more often than you'd expect. It might be that our building is the White Tower in London, and it was built nearly 1,000 years ago, and William the Conqueror was too busy conquering, wasn't knocking up fire strategies, presenting them to building control. It might be that there just were no discernible standards at the time, or the work's been done without suitable approvals. All of these reasons mean that we might not have a fire strategy, and we do these retrospectively. And this is sort of anecdotal, and if there's any fire engineers on and you message me after, I'd really like to hear whether you anecdotally feel the same. For me, it's about a 50-50 split in the sector at the minute. 50% of inquiries are new build, 50% are retrospective. I think with the Building Safety Act, there's a real focus on existing buildings and submitting safety cases and all that good stuff that we're doing. So about half the work that's banded around, certainly in my portfolio, is actually existing buildings. And I invite you, before we think about how we would develop a retrospective strategy, to think about the question of consider an existing building that was constructed to an out-of-date standard, or it predates current fire regs or standards, or it's literally nearly 1,000 years old. What do we do? Are we putting a firefighting shaft in the White Tower? Are we putting sprinklers in the basement? Are we putting jet fans into the dungeons? All those things. Is that reasonable, proportionate? Do we review it to the same standards? And this, when we got this question from a member saying, could you please cover this? This was the crux of the question. What do we do with existing buildings? And I'm really happy to answer it, because this is a big chunk of my own work. I love working in heritage. Picture of the Colosseum there. One of the sessions I did this month, I was in Rome. I was just down the road from the Colosseum. I'm so passionate about heritage. And we find ourselves very often writing what we call retrospective strategies, or at least passive strategies, or whatever we might call them. Now, where a building is existing, but we have no design information, it's common to produce what is asked for as a retrospective fire strategy or a retrospective fire strategy review. There are broadly two types of retro report that we might carry out. There is what we call a compliance review, which is a review of the building to the standards at the time of construction. And there is a risk-based review, which is what we review to current standards. And they are very, very different reports. And if you are an engineer, or you become one, or you seek to become one, and you start getting asked for these, the first question to nail with the client, got to be in your fee proposal, probably the first call you have with them, is which one do you want? Is it a compliance review you need, or is it a risk-based strategy for your current condition? I note on there some of the reasons we might need to do a retro. It might be the information's wrong, the building's changed, and we're not confident in what the design information says, or it's heritage, they just weren't building them at the time, writing strategies, or we've lost it. It happens all the time. So those two types of retro report are super important, and I want to be some of the takeaways again for the member who wrote to us and said, could you please cover this in one of your webinars? Now, I've got a couple of examples. Some of my team will recognize their own report. I do hope I've anonymized it, especially because we're recording. I definitely hope I've anonymized it. So the first one of these is a risk-based fire strategy. It's a retrospective strategy based on current guidance. And this is, to be honest, how retrospective strategies should be done. If I'm engaged to write a retrospective strategy for an existing building, I am going to review that to current standards that I would design to today. So let's start with the one on the right-hand side, the image. I'll talk through that, and then we'll come into some of the theory, and I've got another example on the next slide. I will suggest it is impossible to write a retrospective strategy without going to site. Then it is not a suggestion, it's a fact. It really is not possible, because your scope, what we're aiming to achieve, is to review what's on site. So you can't do it by driving past or do it on Google Maps. And what my amazing team have done here is they've been on site. So it was observed during team, our company's name, site familiarization visit back in Jan, that the fire alarm detection system is present in the common stair, but does not extend into the common corridor and common lobby as shown below in figure 10. Real project this, I've just plucked it off the system. I don't know if it's a good or bad example, but it is an example. So the area shaded in blue shows areas of, I guess that would be the name of the project, which I've anonymized, which is provided with detection coverage, and the area shaded in red shows areas not. It is understood that the alarm coverage at project name was implemented based on advice from a given fire and rescue service. So what we've said in this case is that we've been to site and observed we've got detectors in the stair but not in the corridors, and we have documented in our retrospective strategy what is on site today as we stand there. Really useful, really good for the client to understand. What we've done is we've benchmarked against current guidance. The reason we do that is because current guidance and regulations is best practice, and that guidance and those regs change for a reason. They change because it represents our best knowledge that we have, our best scientific and engineering principles that we apply to building design. So we review to current approved document B, 99999991, etc. But that doesn't mean that we just say the building needs to be updated to current standards. That's not the point. What we say is these are derogations. These are things existing in the building that break current principles that we would design to. So this building is over 11 meters, we would sprinkler it today. But the report, the retrospective fire strategy, needn't then say, so fit sprinklers. Every time we get a new ADB, we're not going to every building in Britain and redoing it, and we'd be doing it every 5 minutes, every time's a new ADB. What we're doing though is using the current best practice and best knowledge to benchmark against and assess our building to best current knowledge and standards. So it's important, final bullet point, that a retrospective strategy benchmark against current standards and carry out a risk-based review of any derogations. Now, what that looks like in a strategy is on the next slide from the same report, we've got some of those derogations. And this is, again, the way I present it and the way that our team present it. It's not right or wrong. Well, it is hopefully not wrong, but it's not the only way. But this is, we believe, a useful way. We include in every one of our retrospective reports a derogation schedule. And we highlight everything that doesn't meet current standards if that building were to be built today. And if the risk in that building is enough that we think we need to upgrade to current standards, under our system, we call that a red. We can see in the bullet points there that red is an alteration deemed necessary to address an existing condition within the building deemed unsatisfactory. And we can see in actual fact that the top bullet point, lack of smoke detection in communal areas, we've called that red. We think the mitigation is you must install smoke detection. Travel distances are extended. We recommend you upgrade those. You'll note that in this example, we disagreed with the fire service. Again, I've anonymized it. I hope nobody recognizes it. If you do, that's not my intention. The fire service have said fit detectors in the stair, but not in the common corridors. We've come in and said, look, we're not happy with that. That doesn't work because in this example, we have a smoke control system we also need to activate. We're not satisfied that only activating when smoke's in the stair, because by that point, you've lost your corridor, etc., etc. But a little further down, I've put in a bit wider of the table because I wanted to highlight some areas where we don't recommend upgrades. Orange for the roof coverings, the third one down on the right hand side. Roof coverings do not achieve B roof T4, which is what we would expect if we were building it today. We put that as an orange. That's something that's recommended to improve existing safety, but we don't think it's completely unsatisfactory as it stands. This building, if it's the one I'm thinking of, is quite a tall building, and everything else around it in the environment is much, much lower. This is, I don't know, twice as tall as any other building around. So the risk of a fire happening adjacent, landing on our roof, causing a fire is quite low. And we think the risk of that isn't proportionate to rip the whole roof off an existing building. The example at the bottom in green, dry riser outlets outside the communal stair enclosure. In this case, I don't know this project particularly well. I've been reviewing it a little bit, but I didn't work on it myself. The dry riser should, under current standards, be inside the stair enclosure, I guess is what we're saying. We've said, don't rip it out and put it back in. It's not proportionate. The riser's in place. You're better off spending your time, resources, and money somewhere else. So it's a green. We recommend it. Have it as a legacy defect. It's not how we build it today, but we don't think the risk is proportionate to start ripping it out. It is there. It works. It does what we need it to do. But interestingly, we've called it red that you must replace the signage. That probably links in, doesn't it? And says, look, we're happy for you to leave the dry riser outlet, not in the stair. Maybe it's in the corridor. I don't know on this scheme. But it's red and mandatory. You fix the signage so it points to the right place. Feels like a good piece of work to me, to be honest with you there. So in retrospectives, we design slightly differently to how we do a new build design. Rather than making decisions along the way, we review the existing condition, benchmark to current standards, and then decide whether any of those derogations need or warrant an update, an upgrade to the building, or whether we're satisfied that actually the risk's low enough that we're pretty happy. Right, excellent, cool, we'll soldier on. The other type we talked about was a compliance review. I said there are two types of retro. The first one is what we just discussed is risk-based, and the second type is a compliance review. Now, this again, I'd like to be a takeaway for folks who are learning or are practicing maybe, but find it this difficult to differentiate. It's an important point. A compliance review is reviewing a building to the standards at the time of construction. Now, that can be valuable in some cases, and we do a good chunk of that. A couple of my guys who are on the call, Alicia Limara, we've just done a big piece of work doing this, where we did a compliance review at time of construction. The reason for that was because there was some litigation against a contractor. Had they made mistakes? Should it have been built in that way in the year in which it was constructed? Fair piece of work, it needed doing, but we caveated really heavily by saying, we're not saying you just need to bring it back to the standards of 1970, whatever it was. In addition, we need to do a retro and decide what you're going to do to make the building safe today. But a compliance review to standards at the time is not something that we consider for life safety in our fire strategy. So if our objective is just to work out liability, to apportion blame, to work out what mistakes were made at time of construction, and there is a world where that exists, there is an expert witness industry within our sector that's where that is, and I live in that industry, don't get me wrong, it's an important part of what some of us do. But it's not the correct approach if we're looking at building safety. It's not appropriate, in my view, to say, well, the building was built to this standard. It was okay at the time. Standards have changed, but we'll build it back to what we said in the 1970s. And again, another shameless plug for the podcast, an accidental plug. Last week, I had this exact discussion on air. It comes out on a Thursday. So last Thursday, this episode was on. We were talking about a building that had burnt down, and the insurance underwriter had said, we'll rebuild it to the standard it was. And in response to the question, I said, but it'll just burn down again because that's what happened last time. So why is it acceptable to rebuild a building? Perhaps we should do it properly this time and you might not lose your building next time. An important differentiation between compliance at the time of construction versus a retro strategy looking at safety of occupants sleeping in that building tonight. So ultimately, fire strategies, before we come on to how we write them, which is the last part of the talk, part 3, fire strategies in existing buildings need to take holistic and pragmatic review to fire safety, drawing on both guidance and risk-based approaches as well. So we need to consider what we would expect to see, what we do see, and then what we would like to see done as well. Really important for retros. To the member who requested that, I do hope that answered your question. I'd love to hear from you if it did or didn't, and I can clarify in future if you're on the call or message me after. So back to kind of what is the strategy, what does it look like? Broadly, we are breaking down any strategy, whether it's design or retro, into the constituent parts of the building regs. I've never seen a fire strategy that isn't laid out something like this. Our report is written against the requirements of the building regulations, the 5 parts. So we ought to have a section for each of those 5 parts. 2 of my guys, I'm shouting out my entire team today, sorry to embarrass you all. Bassett, who's on a train to site right now, Tia, who's project managing a scheme with him, they're going to a site, and we had a call yesterday, little kickstart meeting, and we decided we're going to change this report around a bit because we're writing a fire strategy retro for 4 different buildings. So we're going to do a little appendix for B1 for each of them and all of that. Clever little bit of reformatting that one from the guys. But fundamentally, we're still covering the building regulations, and we've built that bespoke report for that client around the 5 requirements: means of warning and escape, internal fire spread, linings and structure, external spread, and access for the fire service. Broadly, the contents, a couple of bits from experience. I'll tell you that this is important. The start and end are super important in any report. Introduction and scope. Always set out what the building is you're working on and what your scope of appointment is. Such and such consultancy limited have been engaged to provide fire engineering support with respect to this building. Here's a picture of it. This is our scope. It's not the building next door, whatever else. Sources of information. Here's the information we've been provided in carrying out our review. These are the latest drawings from the architect with revision numbers, how they were received, dates, times, etc. If it's retro, this is the date we attended site. This is what we observed. I've stuck 1,000 photos in the appendix. This is the information I've been provided. A derogation schedule, we touched on that for retro, but it is equally important for a design by saying we've designed the building to not meet standards and not meet guidance, and here's how we've justified it. So we generally have that up front. Sections covering each of the building regs, and then we cover with some management if it's a late stage design. And me personally, and this is just kind of how I do it, some in my team disagree, and you're absolutely right to, is any of the technical stuff I tend to put in an appendix so you don't lose the reader as they're reading the report. When I write a strategy myself, I very often say in section B1 about means of escape, all the occupancy calcs are in appendix B, go read them, but also keep reading this section. It's kind of my own style of it. You will know, again, I've plucked just on the right hand side a bit of a contents page from one of our reports. I don't know which one it is, probably one I've already referenced, but you'll see that for each of these there are various subsections. If we look at section 6 in that report, that alone starts with evacuation strategy, fire alarm detection. That's broken down to communal, dwellings, ground floor office, fire alarm panel. We cover in as much detail as we can strategically all the fire strategy components in our design. So, doing actually bang on for time, pacing wise. It's all fluke. I promise you, I haven't rehearsed this. I only finished writing it a minute before I came on air. So how do we go about doing that then? Do we finish with the how? So we've said our building regs give us the what, but not the how. Where do we start? Well, we have lots of guidance to help us do that. If we're told to write a fire strategy and it says we need to determine appropriate means of escape, appropriate structure and adequate means for the fire service, how do we define those terms? Where do we start? Very often we start with guidance, and there are 2 types of guidance we may refer to. I always like to differentiate these, and people question it at first, and then when you think about it, there are 2 types, in fact. There is prescriptive guidance, like approved document B, which is free to download. Google it, you can download it, read everything in there for free. The British standards, 999, 999, they will tell you all the different aspects of all different types of building you might come across. So ADB will tell you in volume 2, a building that's not a dwelling, how to design a commercial building. And it'll break down, as it says on the cover, each of the building regs to kind of practical guidance on how to design the fire alarm and the means of escape, external spread, blah, blah, blah. And there's a different type of guidance called building specific guidance. And most engineers on the call, I know I certainly do, you have a little folder on your desktop with all of these you've collected / stolen / acquired over the years of all the different types of premises like custodial, schools, hospitals, whatever else. And if you are designing a specialist type of facility, you go to there and it just tells you guidance specific to that type of premises. Custodial premises, section about means of escape is really quite enhanced, as you'd expect, over perhaps not enhanced, but different to a hospital, which talks about progressive horizontal, and schools different again. So an important takeaway and another beat to land on is that the guidance that we use there is not mandatory. We don't have to follow that, but we can draw on the guidance within there. So approved document B is not mandatory. It's not that isn't the regulation. I see this kind of queried a lot, and unfortunately, when I look at the front page of approved document B there, it says in big letters the building regulations, and it says at the top His Majesty's government. And if I weren't kind of well versed in this, I'd look at it and probably go, oh, that's the building regs. Like, I've got to do what's in that book. It's not true. You don't have to. It is a piece of guidance. And again, the benefit of experience, I can tell you, having written guidance before, it is very, very difficult, because picture for a moment that after this call, I called one of you up, or each of you up, and I said, can you do me a favor? Could you write a piece of prescriptive guidance for fire safety for the building regs? And what it has to do, I appreciate this is tough, but what it has to do is cover every type of strategy, new build, existing, retrospective, heritage, all in one document. And it has to also cover every different type of building, from an office to a swimming pool to a shop to a castle to a block of flats to a dwelling house. But it's got to be in one document. You do it in 180 pages and can have it by Friday. Like, it is an almost impossible task, and guidance isn't there intended to do that for you. It is there to be a benchmark and to work for what it calls simple premises, non-complex premises. So in our strategy, we start by looking at the guidance and seeing about whether our design that we've got meets the guidance that's established, that is accepted, and we know that is a bit of a benchmark. And failing that, we design away from there. But an important part of this, and when I teach this as a training course, I teach this subject, and in fact, I'm teaching it tomorrow at 9 o'clock. So if anyone's on the call and sitting my course with me tomorrow, I pick up from here and build on it, and we design the building together. What happens is we look at the guidance, and it is limited in its complexity. It applies only to relatively simple buildings. And we look at our design and we say, okay, we'll start with the guidance and we'll go from there. And very often we find ourselves having to develop engineered solutions, or engineering solutions in. And for me personally, the first thing that I do is I look to the guidance. You start with approved document B, and I'll see if my building complies, because I know that's an established principle. In theory, and there's a massive asterisk next to that when I say it, in theory, it's a safe and approved design route. There are lots of things in ADB that I know are not safe when I've modeled them and things like that, but we'll come back to that in a second. I start with the guidance, and then I move on from there and see if I need an engineered solution. And there are broadly 3 methods that I use for this to feed into my report for each of those subsections. The first thing I might choose to do is to comply with an established guidance, so a code compliant route. For example, approved document B gives me a schematic there for how to design a single stair block of flats based on the principles of compartmentation between flats, fire doors, limiting travel distance, and ventilating the lobby. If my building complies with that, fantastic. That's my design approach. I'm going to follow that and write my strategy based off of the guidance in ADB. If my building maybe doesn't, and I want to change it up, and my travel distance is 8.5 meters, I might say in my design, can we reduce the travel distance, move the stair? If you've got cross corridor doors, can we remove them maybe, and can we have it so we have a lobby approach and we ventilate the whole lobby? That might be a good piece of design. I will either amend the design during my design review to meet guidance, or if I already meet the guidance, I know I've got an established principle. That's my first option, really. But because guidance isn't mandatory, there are other things that I can do. And if I'm an engineer, I may seek to deviate away from that, not because I want to bend the rules, but because the rules are there for very simple premises. And most buildings, certainly I work on as an engineer, the only reason I'm engaged is because I'm working on a complex building. So I look at my engineered solutions. The first method I'd use for this is what we call equivalency. And equivalency in engineering is if I take an established principle and I can quantify the safety, and if I can demonstrate that my design doesn't meet that guidance, but it is equivalent to, it's equivalent to or better than, I've demonstrated equivalency. And the great example I use for this all the time is travel distance. So let me pick an example. Purpose group 3, an office. You need to have 18-meter travel distance limitation in one direction and 45 to reach a place of safety. That's not a regulation. That's not illegal to deviate from that. I'm sat in a building that doesn't meet that standard right now. It's my own head office. But what I would do is I'd say, okay, well, because I don't meet that standard, I need to demonstrate equivalency or do an engineered solution. So what shall I do instead? And the way that I approach that, and travel distance is one of these that I do very simply as a simple solution, not involving modeling and all that kind of crazy expensive stuff, is I'd say, okay, so what approved document B is telling me there is that my office needs to have 45-meter travel distance maximum to get to a place of safety. And I look through the document and I think, what else does it say for an office that I need to have? And if I follow that chain through and you go through the whole process, you say, okay, the office then, you limit travel distance to 45 meters, but I only need 2 stairs and I don't need a fire alarm because all I need is a manual system. And if I solve that through another solution, I say, but I've got an automatic system in my office, which I genuinely do. Again, I don't know if I'm on camera, don't know which camera's on, but there is one, I promise. Okay, that allows me an offset because I'm designing way above what is otherwise accepted within that guidance parameter there. If I go fully code compliant, I can demonstrate I'm far safer than, and I can do that by modeling, or I can just do it by pragmatism, by saying, right, the risk of having an extended travel distance is people have to stay in the building slightly longer because they have to travel for a longer distance, therefore a longer duration. So how do I offset that as an engineer? What I need to do is make sure that either my building is safer for longer because people are in it for a longer period, or if they're extending the travel time, what I need to do is reduce some other part of their escape. Maybe I'm alert them quicker. So if I have an extended travel distance, I don't immediately think, okay, game over, guys, we need to redesign the building. I go, right, we can solve this, I think, with equivalency. What I'm going to do is if I've got sprinklers, that's over and above. So actually the building's safer for longer, and I'm going to seek to demonstrate that that's safer, equivalent or safer. Or because you have to travel a little bit further, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure people are alerted quicker, and I'm going to put an automatic system in, and that allows me an offset of travel distance. If we would be comfortable with the approved document B compliant route, if I can demonstrate that I'm safer than that route, I've demonstrated equivalency, and very often I'm much safer than what the guidance would otherwise let you design to. And then the final one, in lieu of doing that, in lieu of just taking the guidance and code bashing and saying we're going to be slightly better than, we can go fully fire engineered. And this really is my world, fire engineering. This is modeling that we've done on a scheme recently. What we may choose to do is to use all the knowledge we have as engineers, which is drawn from multiple disciplines. A fire engineer needs to have understanding of fire science, fire engineering, architecture, structural, psychology, biology, physics, chemistry, everything, all of the above. And we use all that knowledge and we design buildings using the performance-based approach. What will really happen in a fire? The example that we have here was quite an interesting one. We did some CFD modeling of a building to demonstrate that the anticipated fire size would be nowhere near what the test standard requires, or at least what the structural members are exposed to, because we have a sprinkler system in and there's no sprinkler in the test. So in this case, we were able to justify reducing fire resistance from 90 minutes to 60 minutes using first principles of what a reasonable worst case fire would be. For anyone who does CFD or is wondering, the kind of AstroTurf looking thing in the bottom left image, they're actually thermocouples. We put 1,000 thermocouples in, I think, 100 by 100 array to measure temperature all the way across the structural member as the ceiling jet went across. It was a cool piece of modeling. It took forever. We used every computer we've got in the world, I think. But we were able to do a fire engineered solution there based off a performance base, how the building will really respond in fire. Cool piece of work, and really our kind of, certainly my bread and butter, doing real engineering. In that case, the building does not comply with guidance. That's okay. What we've done in our strategy to close this piece off is demonstrated that the building is safe. We've met our objectives, which was life safety. In this case, we had some property protection. We had some asset protection, loads of things in addition to what we have to do from a statutory perspective. And our building is far safer because of it, because we engineered it, full engineered solution. An important note, and I come towards the sort of end of the talk, and then I hope everyone will stick around, because when I say that, everyone dials off. But there's a couple of bits at the end that summarise and are helpful. So please do stick with me. A really important note, and it is a really important takeaway that I like to give when I teach this and when I talk about this subject, is that when developing fire engineered solutions, there is not. If there was, it would be worth $1 billion, not billion, million, 100 grand. I don't know. It'd be valuable. There is not a little tick sheet. You can go tick, 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 there's your solution. It is bespoke. It has to be based on the building. It is not as simple as, despite many clients phoning me up and saying, oh, we're going to do this instead. Is that okay? Can you write me a report to justify the solution we already have? It doesn't work like that. It all has to be based on solving the correct problem. I say all the time, solutions have to be pragmatic and proportionate. If we're in existing buildings, it's got to be proportionate to the risk that we see. If it's in existing new builds, so it's a design strategy, it's not simply what the guidance says. It has to be relevant to the building that we're designing. The important note is that prescriptive guidance is not always the safest approach. If anyone doesn't understand what I'm saying there, or doesn't know why, or questions it, or says, but approved document B must be the holy grail, the image on the right-hand side is some of my own modelling, CFD report that I wrote. We're down to figure 58 in the report, scenario 10. So you can see I spent a good chunk of time on this. And how many seconds is that after? I'll move this dialog box. 562 seconds into a fire, so we're 9 minutes in, 9.5 minutes or something. That is, viewed from above, a code compliant natural shaft in a residential building that is completely compliant with ADB. It's a bit of a complex design and there's a lot going on there, but it's within the parameters of ADB, and it is a 1.5 meter squared natural shaft, and that's what the building looks like after 9.5 minutes. That is the best example that I have when I was putting this presentation together this morning of code compliance not always being the safest. I will, as an engineer, intentionally deviate from guidance if it is not the safest. And if I get pushed back and say, can you comply with guidance? I will and have walked away from projects and said, I'm not going to stick my name to something I don't wholeheartedly believe is safe. And that doesn't just mean guidance. So the essence of a fire strategy report is not simply compliance. It is, as it says on screen, a live document. We seek to provide the reader with accurate information, whoever that reader is. It may be our design team, it may be an approver, it may be an end user, it may be the fire service, building control, BSR, whoever. And when we're benchmarking, we're ensuring the guidance is appropriate and it's safe. Not all guidance does lead to safety, an important point speaking as a fire engineer. So I will summarize very quickly, and then I've just got a very quick note about the branch, and then we're good for time. The summary is that fire strategy is a form of fire report. There are many different types of fire report, but strategy is very specific that provides strategic, high-level fire safety information about a building. It may be a design document, or it may be produced retrospectively. When we undertake it at design stage, what we're looking to do is develop along with the design team, and it's ultimately presented to the approval authorities. And it should really, it should continue to be updated during construction and be handed over to the end user so they understand their site. If we are doing a retrospective review, we will benchmark against current guidance. If we're looking at life safety, there may be other reasons that we look at existing or previous standards. Largely, if we're looking at litigation or we're doing legal work, and that's valuable there, but generally we're looking at current standards. Fire engineered solutions we use, we either meet with prescriptive guidance, we demonstrate equivalency, or we go full performance-based design on top of that. Cool. I fear I've gone on slightly further. So what I'm going to do is, anyone who's attended this call, and thank you to the couple hundred of you who have, we are so unbelievably grateful as a branch. I promise you, you don't even realize. If you have any feedback or you've got anything you want to chat about, please do get in touch with us in the Teams chat. Message me personally. I've got my email on there. Get me on LinkedIn, wherever else I am. Let us know as a branch. This is the last one we're doing of these this year, and we're currently reviewing what we're going to do next year. We'd love to keep doing these, but we have to demonstrate as a branch that it's valuable and people like them. If you don't like them, let us know and we won't, and we'll do something else. That's not a problem. So we really do welcome feedback. It's not for me personally. It doesn't grow my ego. It helps the branch grow and keep doing what we're doing. So please do help promote us if you can. And it's on there. My contact details if you have any questions. The questions that have come in, unfortunately, I've run out of time and we're going to get booted out in 2 minutes. But what I will do is I will respond to each of you. So if I don't have your contact details or know you personally, what I'll do is put together a big FAQ document, bang it out on LinkedIn next week by the branch, and you'll get all the answers to the questions. So, there we are. That worked, didn't it? Thank you, everyone. On behalf of the branch, thank you very much, everyone, for coming along, and we will see you on the next one, which, well, maybe if we do one. It'll be in the new year if we do, though. Otherwise, have a good one, and thank you all for attending. I'll see you soon.